Hello, and welcome to this episode of Real Life and Other Fantasies. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards, and our topic this week may seem out of season, but once I explain it to you, you'll understand why we're going to discuss Juneteenth in late November. I'm pleased this week to be joined by award winning documentarian Mary Beth Minnis. Mary Beth, thank you for being our guest on this week's storytelling journey.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Juneteenth is obviously a holiday that we celebrate in June, but elements of your film provide reasons why we can celebrate it during this time of the year. Juneteenth was an answered prayer for enslaved Texans and provided a new birth of freedom, as President Lincoln indicated. What better time to celebrate birth, freedom, and clean slates than at Christmas time? This topic is personal for me because my ancestors were enslaved Texans on June 19, 1865, when they finally received word that the Emancipation Proclamation had set them free. Of course, that executive order was signed 2.5 years earlier, but better late than never. Mary Beth's passion is sharing inspirational stories of resilience and hope. She has taken that passion and collaborated on a wide range of topics, from sports professionals to refugees, female entrepreneurs to freedom fighters. And as I indicated, her latest project is called Juneteenth, Faith and Freedom, and it features 2022 Nobel Peace Prize nominee Opal Lee. The documentary aired on PBS and received the 2023 Wilbur Award. Mary Beth also executive produced the film's accompanying soundtrack, featuring two-time Grammy Award-winning hip-hop artist Lecrae. So I'll begin my questions with the one you probably asked the most. So Mary Beth, how did a white woman from Oklahoma become interested enough in the original Juneteenth that you decided to do a documentary?
Well, if people could see me right now, they would see a big smile on my face because that's a great question. Who am I to tell this story? Who am I? I'll tell you the way I learned about Juneteenth. I didn't celebrate it growing up. My family didn't celebrate it, but when I moved to Texas, I moved to Lubbock, Texas in the year 2000, and I became friends with a man named Mike Springer, and he celebrated Juneteenth, and he introduced me to the holiday, and that's sort of when it began. And then I believe it was 3 years ago, my friend Rasul Berry, who is a producer on the documentary Juneteenth, Faith and Freedom. He's also the host, the one featured in the film, who you go on the journey with to learn from the direct descendants of those who were freed on Juneteenth. And he's really the visionary behind the project. We'd known each other for about 10 years, and he felt a burden to tell this story. He saw the opportunity in our country for this federal holiday to either be something that would further be used to divide us or something that could bring us together. And he wanted to capitalize that and capture the history of Juneteenth. And he decided to do that in the form of a documentary. And we've been friends for over a decade. He came to me, he said, I want to do this. Will you help me? And I prayed about it. I'm a person of faith. And I just felt like I was supposed to do that. I was supposed to come alongside him and do whatever I could do to help him to tell this story. And it's been an absolute privilege. I've learned so much. I've been celebrating Juneteenth for the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years in a more active way. So my friend Kimberly Iglesias in Buda, I've been joining her for the celebration she's been organizing. So it's been something that I've been a part of at a distance, and now I'm much more, I feel like, intimately involved in the holiday, having the privilege of getting to know Miss Opal Lee, for example, the grandmother of Juneteenth.
Well, that leads me directly into my next question. So, how did you manage to get a Nobel Prize nominee and a two-time Grammy winner involved in this project?
Okay, well, speaking of prayer, that's something that my friend Rasul and I believe in deeply. And we like to dream big and to pray. And so, as he was doing research on who we need to interview, Miss Opal Lee's name came up again and again and again. And then we discovered that she was represented by CAA. And we went through the proper channels and somehow got through to her granddaughter, Dion Sims, who now I call a really good friend. And we found favor in their eyes. And Miss Opal Lee was familiar with Our Daily Bread Ministries, which is who is behind the film, who really brought it into being. And so she said yes. And so I drove up to Fort Worth and joined the rest of the crew for the interview with her. And I mean, I would say my life has never been the same since meeting this woman. She is such an inspiration. At every turn, she takes the opportunity to say, if you can be taught to hate, you can be taught to love. And this is a woman who suffered greatly. I believe she was about 12 years old when a mob showed up at the home her family had recently moved into in Fort Worth. And it was on Juneteenth. And they didn't want them living in that neighborhood because they were Black. And they had to leave under the cover of darkness, and their house was destroyed. And it shaped her. And her Christian faith shaped her. And she chose a path of love and justice and forgiveness. And I have to say, I was recently just overwhelmed. On her 97th birthday, Habitat for Humanity broke ground on the very same land where her family was driven away so that Opal Lee could come home. And
That's amazing.
It was so moving to see that moment of an injustice. Not that it is fully just, but it is an attempt. And there's this beauty of the way that she moves in the world to unite people and to say, you know, we can these things can happen in our lives, and we can choose to form, you know, a hatred and allow that to fester, or we can choose to the path of love. And that's what she's done. And so that's the path I'm trying to take with my life. So meeting her and getting to know her and calling her friend has been such an honor.
That's so touching and amazing. And the fact that she's alive shows how current and how recent these events were.
Yes.
Having the recent anniversary of Ruby Bridges, who, as a 5-year-old, became the first Black child in the South to go to a predominantly white school, an all white school until she went there. Seeing how young she is, it really blew my mind when somebody mentioned to me that she's younger now than Cyndi Lauper, the entertainer. That really sort of gives you an idea that this really wasn't that long ago.
Wow. Puts it in perspective.
Unfortunately, we're still, that it really does. And we're still sometimes having to build bridges and tear down walls just to have a conversation. And I hope people who watch your documentary are having those conversations. And first of all, I hope they watch it and then have conversations, sit down with their family and watch it. But we'll come back to more to that a little bit later. My follow-up question is regarding Opal Lee and Lecrae being involved in this project. Were you ever nervous about how people might perceive you when you approached them about being a part of this?
Yes, absolutely. I would say I was nervous for two different audiences. One, I was really nervous, and I still feel nervous, interacting with African Americans who are descendants of enslaved people, because I feel, you know, this is your story, this is their story, and I want to be as authentic and faithful to helping the people whose story it is tell their own story. But I feel inadequate at times. I feel, you know, unsure of how I'm going to be perceived either. I don't want to come across like, I don't know, in any way other than a humble person who's just trying to help people tell their story. So there's that part that I feel nervous about. And then secondly, I wasn't sure how people would respond who are not direct descendants of those who were enslaved. How would they perceive that I'm involved in this project? Would they immediately see images on social media or short clips or whatever and have a misunderstanding of the heart behind the project? And I think so many things these days are politicized, and people come at the world from a perspective, and then those perspectives can get sort of inflamed and polarizing of people, and they don't have the time or the energy, or they don't make the time or the energy to educate themselves or to listen and to pause. And so I hate being misunderstood. And so I just, there's people out there that are going to misunderstand perhaps, and that makes me nervous. But usually the people who misunderstand, I find, are the people who haven't actually watched the film. If they watch the film, it's clear that it is not intended to be divisive in any way.
And we'll come back to that.
Okay. You'll
I
probably
don't
have
want
to
to
edit some
keep
of
trying
that.
to tease people, but there's a question that I want to ask that's specific to that tone of your answer. So we'll come
Okay.
back around to that. Not to be a tease here, but so what did you hope to accomplish with the film?
Yeah, well, really, I felt like my role was to come alongside my friend Rasul and help him do his job. But in addition to that, I would say I wanted to help tell a hopeful story, an honest story that would educate our country and the world and inspire people to acknowledge what has really happened, and to choose to come together and to celebrate freedom from the 19th of July, I mean 19th of June, all the way to the 4th of July. One of the things that you talked about in your video was that freedom for everyone in the United States of America came on June 19th, or everyone in Texas. I know there were later times that in different states that slavery was unfolding as far as people truly being
Hmm.
free. But if we're kind of choosing this marker of June 19th, 1865, that's when the people were free. Ms. Opal Lee says, our land was free July 4th, but our people, all the people were free on June 19th. And I wanted to help shape that and help our country come together. And yeah, so.
Do you feel like you accomplished that goal, or accomplishing? I guess it's an active
I
mode.
think it's probably a lifelong pursuit. So I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're making progress. I'm One of the things that was the most moving to me was at one of our screenings. It was organized by an African American woman, and it was predominantly white people, Caucasian people in the audience who were in her church community. And afterwards, there was a time of confession and repentance and tears. And people, they they had not understood and really taken the time to pay attention to this part of history and how it affects people. And it transformed those people's relationship, and it transformed that community. And that was a former sundown community, meaning at sundown, if you were Black, you were not safe. And so to see that happening gives me hope that these as these screenings take place, as people watch it on PBS or on YouTube, or if we get the opportunity to have it in broader places, that people's hearts and minds will be moved to listen and to embrace and to confess and to repent and to choose to acknowledge and to choose to celebrate.
And one of the frustrating things to me, as someone who studies history, is this. Well, I'll just be direct. The stubbornness of some people who refuse to acknowledge that events of the past have a direct impact on current events. And in fact, all events happened in the past, even if it was 1 second ago. Everything happened in the past. And we just don't acknowledge other people's past as having an impact on their future and on their current situation. And another timeline perspective, I mentioned Cyndi Lauper earlier. Um, People understand the Irish potato famine, whether they're Irish or not. That happened longer ago than the end of slavery. So slavery is more recent than the Irish potato famine. But people of all races understand what happened there and how that impacted that nation, and how generations later are still impacted because of what happened, events at that point. And I just wish people connected history to daily events, because it's impossible to disconnect the two.
I agree.
So my next question is sort of a process question about being a documentarian. Well, what is the hardest part of producing a documentary? Is it the organizational part at the beginning, or the editing stuff at the end of
Okay, so I'm going to answer your question, but it's not simple.
it?
It's all difficult. It's all really difficult. It's hard to say which part is more difficult. You're constantly dealing with not enough time and not enough money and too many problems and too many issues. That's what you're dealing with constantly. And but what I have found to be actually the most difficult part of the entire process is the distribution part. And that is getting people to watch the film and to pay attention to it. And, in this day and age, I feel like attention is a type of currency. And so if you can get somebody's attention, you can impact their heart and their mind, you can influence them. And it's hard to get people's attention. And so that's why I'm really grateful to be having this, conversation with you today, and that you're sharing about a little bit about me and about this film with your audience, because it means more people will have the opportunity to see it. So my short answer is neither of those. They're both hard, and distribution is the hardest part.
Okay. All right. Now coming back around to the question that I sort of teased earlier, because I generally like my podcast and situation to be positive, and I understand this question has some negative undertones, but I think it's an important question to ask. So I've heard some well-known people trash Juneteenth. I won't mention their names. You probably know who they are, as a racially divisive opposition holiday to July 4th. Have you personally gotten any of that kind of feedback?
I'm aware that people are saying that. I'm not as familiar as you are with who those people are and what they're saying, but I'm aware that they're saying it. I don't know why people don't say it to me, but they don't say it to me. They don't give me that feedback. The only time
Hmm.
I would get that feedback is if I were like at a party or in a public setting and somebody doesn't know that I'm associated with Juneteenth faith and freedom, and they're just sharing their thoughts. Um, but as a general rule, if they know anything about me, they're not bringing it up to me. So, have you gotten that feedback personally to you?
No, not directly, but I've seen it. And actually, one of my jobs, and this is, I use the word job with air quotes, one of the things that I do in life is teach people as I'm learning, because there's so much stuff that I still have to learn, even about my own history. I've written 2 books about my family's history, and it's taken me over 30 years of research to write
Wow.
those 2 books because I'm learning along the way. But one of the things that I've been really conscious about is teaching about Juneteenth. And I've had this for the last 3 years, what I call a Juneteenth family picnic, family cookout kind of thing on Twitter, or X as it's now called, where I invite people to, obviously this is all imaginary, we're not actually gathering, but I invite people to bring their favorite family dish, whether it's traditional or something they currently enjoy with their family. Bring that, tell us, like maybe even give us the recipe for it, and then we have a discussion about this and other topics that people are nervous to talk about. And the first year I did it, it was probably one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done.
Wow.
I was so
Mm.
encouraged. People came with open and honest questions, and we had a great dialogue. And I was just really uplifted. I was encouraged that maybe we're making progress. Maybe we're in a new time of history. And this was during COVID, so that may have had something to do with it. So 2020 was a unique year in
Mhm.
American history and world history, and it was an opportunity. And and so I've done this every year for the last 3 years for Juneteenth, and it's been encouraging each time. But the first year I was blown away.
Oh.
So the
I
opportunity is there. There are people who want to
I
talk.
think so
They
too.
just don't know
They don't
how,
know how, and they need
and
an
they need to feel safe.
invitation.
They need to feel safe.
They need an
Right.
invitation. And, I love what a creative way you did that. And you made it like a family, like a let's share and come to the table and talk, and I think there's such beauty in
Yes.
that. There's such vulnerability and power and openness that can happen. And one of the things about the actual film Juneteenth, Faith and Freedom, that I've gotten feedback on and I have found to be true myself is you are going on a journey with the host, Russell Berry. He's going and he's interviewing people and you're learning alongside him. And there's something about that
Yes.
that gives the viewer permission to not feel guilty about what they don't know because they're learning alongside him. And he's a black man, and
Mhm.
is still learning more as he's going. And I think that I love that we made that choice. The director is Yaki Smith. He's an incredible director. And that decision was a really brilliant one because instead of watching history being taught to you, you're actually going along with a person, learning alongside them. And I think it's a really powerful way to help people to feel invited to learn.
It's a disarming gesture. So people don't feel like they have to be defensive or they're being talked to.
Right.
They're having a conversation with someone, and that's how it feels. So I really appreciate that aspect of the documentary as well. So if you, this is a very personal question, how would you feel if you won an Emmy award for this
Oh, I would be so happy. So
film?
happy. I
Have you thought about it?
absolutely, I've thought about it. I've learned stepping into this documentary space in the film industry that these awards for different things, whether it's an Oscar or an Emmy, the pursuit of those allows more people to be exposed to the film and to learn about the film and to watch the film and be impacted by it. It also feels great to have that what seems like objective validation. It never is, but it feels like, okay, people acknowledge this. So, but more than anything, I think I would love to see the film, be even that we would be able to submit it, that we would be nominated. And if we were to win, just how much joy that would bring to our team. Our director, Yaki Smith, has worked in the industry for a long time. He doesn't happen to have an Emmy. I'd love to be able to help him get an Emmy so that he can keep telling more stories. And so that more people will know about the film and will be able to, like what you're doing, understand our history and come together.
It's again, it's an important film. I hope everybody gets a chance to watch it. It's on YouTube. It doesn't cost you anything. You don't have an excuse. All it's going to cost is time. But what you gain from it it'll be a great return on investment. So again, just to remind you, the film is called Juneteenth, Faith and Freedom, and it's available on YouTube. So let's talk about some of the other documentaries you've done.
Sure.
You've done a wide range. You've done a documentary on Rwanda, and then you've done a documentary on the inventor of the basketball jump shot. That's a pretty wide range. So how do you choose your projects? Is it from a personal interest?
I feel like they choose me more than I choose them. It's a combination of a few things. One, I would say they're stories usually about people. And so, like when you mentioned Rwanda, I've worked on 2 films about people who are Rwandan and their stories. So they're more about these people's lives, but they just happen to live in Rwanda and they've had those experiences. So I'm more drawn to stories of people and stories of hope, stories of resilience and overcoming obstacles. I'm drawn to stories where you see humility on display in the most beautiful way. So when I saw a rough cut of what would eventually become Jump Shot, The Kenny Sailors, which is directed by Jacob Hamilton, it I was so moved by the man Kenny Sailors because I thought
Hmm.
this is what a man is supposed to be like. He didn't pursue fame and fortune. He pursued taking care of his family. He pursued fighting for our country. He certainly pursued excellence at the game of basketball, and he made incredible leaps and bounds. He pursued helping women in Alaska have the opportunity to play basketball because women weren't there weren't programs designed for women to be able to play basketball. So at every turn he was
Wow.
using his own, power and influence to help those who didn't have it. And that's just really inspiring to me. And also, he transformed the game of basketball. And he did so by developing the jump shot. And that came out of him being shorter than his brother. And he had to figure out a way to beat his brother. I mean, it's great. So,
Sibling rivalry
yes, sibling
changes the
rivalry. It's so
world.
great. And through telling Kenny Sailor's story, I had the opportunity to meet some basketball greats, including Dirk Nowitzki and Kevin Durant and Stephen Curry. And
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. What was that like?
oh, marvelous. Absolutely marvelous. All 3 of them are just outstanding people. And it was such a privilege to get to meet them. Dirk was so funny. He struck me as just so funny and also humble. And Kevin Durant really stole my heart. And I just, we shared a moment because I shared with him that my favorite part was the when in the film where Kenny is helping women. Pardon me. And he said it was his favorite part too when he watched the rough cut and um, just blown away by that experience. And then Steph Curry, just meeting him. I mean, he's just an extraordinary person. So I'm going to take a drink of water.
Okay,
Okay, sorry about that.
that's okay. We're doing a lot of talking here, and I can edit that. I can edit that out. All right, so we're coming near the end of our interview here.
Sure.
So, as a filmmaker, do you personally think in images and videos all the time? Or, for instance, like you're sitting around the table with your family or friends this holiday season. Are you framing the scene and arranging the seats in your mind?
Yes. Well, things will happen. Like I will see a situation and I'll think, ooh, this would be great for, a short, or this is really comical. I need to save this. Like if I ever want to work on a film and include this piece, or absolutely. So, what's funny is I've been documenting things all of my life. I didn't realize that's what I was doing until now I'm in my 40s, and you sort of look back and you realize. So I was making scrapbooks. I was holding on to all kinds of things over the years, photographs and memorabilia, and documenting things. And I was making home movies back when, it was the giant, like on your shoulder. My dad had one, this was like in the 80s and 90s. So it's sort of been in me from the beginning, I think. And so it continues to be there no matter where I am.
So, do your family and friends ever get tired of you arranging their
I'm
seating and
sure they do.
setting up scenarios?
Absolutely.
Do they say
Especially my
anything?
sisters. I'm sure they do.
Have you been doing that since you were little kids? Like a little. I have three daughters, and so I remember them setting up their dolls or stuffed animals in certain scenarios, and it's like a school classroom or something. Is that what you did with your sisters?
Yes, I think it was more, I wanted to work with humans. So I was setting up, my sister and her friends and my cousin, Matt, and I was orchestrating what they needed to do. Like we were mimic like the news, like we would do a newscast and then we needed a commercial. So my cousin was, so young, but we got him to say, I love the lamp. And he didn't understand. He was so young, and he said, "I love the lamp," like 10 times or something. It was just hilarious, but that's more what I was doing is I wasn't using the stuffed animals. I was using the younger children in my family, and directing them.
That's funny. Do they remember that?
I make sure they remember it because I bring out those old videos. Like, remember?
That's funny. Yeah, don't make me do this again. I will do it. Thanksgiving and Christmas too. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, I mean, and
All right, so how close?
one Thanksgiving, this was maybe 15, 20 years ago, I came home and I interviewed both of my grandmothers. This is long before I ever thought I was going to do documentaries. But I thought my grandchildren won't know my grandparents. At this point, I'm not sure I'm going to have grandchildren, but at that point, I still thought I might, and I wanted to capture that. And so I interviewed them at Thanksgiving. So yeah, I wrangled my sister and my dad and everybody to make sure we got those interviews. So I'm sort of the family historian, I think.
Every family has one. I learned that during my own personal research, and some are more accurate than others. We'll just leave it at that. So, how closely aligned are your hobbies with your regular work?
Say that again.
How closely aligned are your hobbies with your regular work? Like for instance, I'm a writer professionally, but my hobbies are also writing. So, are your hobbies like taking pictures, making videos? What do you do as a hobby?
I would say my hobbies are more, well, I would say I used to like to watch movies and documentaries, but now because that's what I do, sometimes I can't take a mental break. If I watch that, I can watch comedies and sort of, be removed. But more of my hobbies are athletic or artistic endeavors. So, tennis, pickleball, basketball. I've just started running. And then I love artistic things. So, fashion, makeup, things like that.
Okay, that probably comes into play when you're
It certainly does.
thinking about new
Yes.
documentaries.
I mean,
So, what
I
types of
grew up
projects do
playing
you? Oh, sorry.
basketball. I think I played really hard so that I could, bond with my dad and my older cousins, and I loved the game, and I think that's part of the reason I wanted to tell Jump Shot the Kenny Sailors story, because Kenny Sailors taught women how to play basketball, and Coach Max Pope taught me how to play basketball, and my dad taught me how to play basketball. So there's definitely in my own personal history a connection to the choices I'm making in the films that I'm putting my time and energy and effort into.
That's awesome. So, what types of projects do you have planned for the near future?
Yeah, well, we're still, like I said, distribution is the hardest part of all of this. And so, even though the film is out there and available, people don't know about it. And so, we're working hard to get it out there. We're doing a college campus tour. We have it on the PBS Learning app. So, if somebody listening to this is a teacher, they can access it for free and use curated content to help educate their students. We're also, Lord willing, going to submit for an Emmy and trying to figure out even how you do that. I'm also in the midst of working on a vinyl record for the soundtrack. So I've never done this before. This is my first foray into this, but I'm figuring out how you get a vinyl made. And I think we're going to use that to help promote the album and the film this coming Juneteenth season. So if you like listening to records, follow us and keep up with us, because you'll get access to how you could get this record. It's a fantastic soundtrack. It's just amazing. So it has the songs that are in the film are on the album, and then several other additional ones. So, and then
Okay. Any idea when it will be available?
spring 2024.
Okay.
We're working on the deadline, but spring 2024.
Okay.
And the other thing I wanted to mention is there's another documentary that I think you and your audience will really like, and it's called Refuge. And it's a feature-length documentary, and it's a friendship between a man who comes to the United States as a refugee from Syria, who is a Muslim, and he comes right after 9/11, and he expects to be rejected by Americans, and instead he's embraced by a group of Episcopalian
Wow.
Christians, is one example of people who embraced him. And he ends up becoming a cardiologist. He's just an incredible person, Dr. Hoval Kelly. And in the film, you get to see him become friends with a man named Chris Buckley. And Chris Buckley was born and raised in the United States and served in the armed forces in the US Army in Iraq and Afghanistan. And when he returned, he had a back injury and ended up addicted to several different drugs and was recruited into the Ku Klux Klan and was rising in leadership.
Whoa.
And his wife, Melissa, she's also a personal hero of mine, stood up to her husband and said, "It's either our family or the Klan," and he chose his family. And in the film Refuge, you get to see in real time uh, Dr. Haval Kelly and Chris Buckley become friends, and how it changes both of them. And it's just so hope giving in our culture right now in the United States, to see somebody who at one point hated and was actively um you know mobilizing more people to hate different groups of people, go from a total transformation, and to see how that impacts him is just incredible. So I highly recommend that film, and
I'm
we're
yes.
trying to get it
I'm looking forward to
shortlisted
that.
for an Oscar right now. So that's another
Wow.
focus of ours right now, is trying to get people to watch it who can help make that decision, so that it garners more attention and more people hear about it and watch it.
Well, I don't have much influence, but whatever shout outs I can give that might be
Yeah,
heard
well, just
someplace that
take
can
the
do
time
something
to
about it, I'll do whatever I
take the
can.
time to watch Refuge, and then share about it. Whatever is in your heart to
Okay.
share, and that will
I
be
will do
plenty.
that.
So
I will do that. So, last question here: is there anything else that you'd like to address that I haven't asked about? So the floor is yours to talk about whatever you want, even if it's off topic from what we've been
Yeah,
discussing.
well, I just wanted to take time to say how grateful I am for you telling your family's story and being courageous to really make it very simple for people to understand our history. And I just wanted to express that, like, I feel really grateful that I was introduced to you, and then I even gained even more of that education. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been an honor getting to know you. And by the way, just speaking of shout outs, let's go ahead and give David
David
Earl
Earl
Adams a
Adams.
shout out. He's the one who introduced. I've known David. You're probably going to giggle at this. I've known David probably since he was 14 years
Wow.
old. He and me and his friend, me and his brother are best friends, and his brother's a few years older than he is. And I've known Steve, his brother, since I was 16 or 17. And David was the knucklehead younger brother who sort of would tag along. And so that's how I got to know David.
I love hearing that. Yeah, DE and I served
So
together on a leadership team for several years, and he's just such a great teammate. And he's somebody who always I felt like saw me and saw who I really was and what I was capable of, and wanted to make sure I was platformed. And even now, just talking about it, it sort of makes me emotional. So he's such a great
mm,
person, DE. So I'm so glad that he introduced us.
DE. DE is a great guy. That whole family is great. I love that family. I love them. That's not an
Yeah.
exaggeration. I love that. So that's the end of our conversation today.
Oh,
I want to thank again.
I did just
Yes.
want to mention one other thing.
Uh,
Are you
oh, okay.
aware
Let's go ahead.
that there is a National Juneteenth Museum being built in Fort Worth?
I think I heard that in your documentary, or I heard it
It's
somewhere
okay,
recently.
it's not in our documentary, but Miss
Okay.
Opal Lee and Jared Howard, he's the CEO of the museum. So Jared Howard is a direct descendant of the first African American woman landowner in Fort Worth. And this was back in maybe like 20 years after 1865, like the 1880s. Don't quote me, but like you can verify it. But I mean, I'm like, who is this woman that she figured out as a Black woman how to become a landowner after being freed? I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, I have incredible privilege. What the family that I was born into, and purchasing a house felt like a huge leap at 30 years old. And the system is set up to help me. You know, so that this woman did this, I'm
Right.
just amazed. So Jared is a direct descendant of this woman, and on this historical land, they are building, or they're in the process of fundraising so that they can build the National um, Juneteenth Museum in Fort Worth. So I was just thinking, your books should be there, and it's something you should look into, and perhaps interview Jared Howard, because
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
um,
No
it's an
question.
incredible project that I also feel like I want to be able to support that in any way that I can. So, yeah.
Well, hopefully he'll hear this episode and we can connect, or I'll reach out to him somehow and have him on here and we can talk about that. That's an incredible story. That sounds like a movie.
Yes. Yes. There's so many. Yeah.
So thank you for making me aware of
You're
that.
welcome.
All right. So our guest today has been award-winning documentary producer Mary Beth Minnis, whose latest project, Juneteenth, Faith and Freedom, is available for free on YouTube. I encourage you to watch it with your family during the holiday gatherings this year. You don't need to wait until June. You can watch it this year. As I mentioned in the beginning, new new births of freedom are timely any time of the year. So I encourage you to watch it with your family. So Mary Beth, thank you for joining us today to share your story. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much.
So that's it for this week's storytelling journey. Don't forget to join us again next week to hear another great storyteller. Until then, don't forget to shine some light wherever you go.